And we're back. Okay, here we go. Again. Um, Essays in general are really, really good. Again, I want to say that to you again. However, a few people this week decided to just kind of state their case but not give any details. To be able to really make your points clear, you have to detail out what you mean. You can't just say, yeah, I think Georgiana changed because whatever, you need to go into detail. You need to show how she changed. You need to show the kind of person she may have been at the beginning and what and why she changed, etc. I think you get the idea. So that was a new little twist for some of you. You were really very, very brief in just stating things but not explaining them. Essays have to explain so that we can all follow your thought process. You're doing quite a nice job on commenting on each other's essays. I'm enjoying that a good deal. What's really fun for me, in fact, is the idea that this week, more than any other, people were willing to say, I do not agree with what you said about so-and-so, and it's interesting that we can have a divergence of opinion and that you are willing to talk about it. To me, that's exciting. To me, that means we're going in the direction that we want to go, where your knowledge of the pieces that help literature fit together are growing, but also your confidence in your own thoughts is growing, and your realization that you can think something different about a piece of literature than somebody else does, and both of you be on the right track. Not that one has to be right and one wrong. Okay, so you're doing a nice job. Again, for those few who were not detailed enough, I did say that in my reaction, and I believe you get my reactions emailed to you as I do them to both your essays and to your comments. Also, a bunch of you are putting your essays in on Thursday or Friday. I love that. That gives me the opportunity Friday evening to get some of those essays commented on already, because it's really a lot of reading and writing on my part as well as on your part, because I have to you read your essay and two or three others, or four or five others, but I have to read and comment on all 20 of your essays, although some people haven't joined us yet, and then on all of your comments as well. I try to comment on all of your comments, and you all do at least two. Some people do 3, 4, 5, which is really cool. It shows that they're very, very involved. I also think it's really neat when you comment back on my comments, especially if my comment opened a new door for you, or if you disagree with my comment. I love it when you come back to me with that. So that's really fun. So keep up the very good work, okay? We want to talk today about the role of the narrator. The narrator is the person who tells us the story, okay? Frequently, the narrator and the author are confused. The narrator and the author are two different beings. The author writes the story. The author also creates the narrator who tells us the story. Okay, so the author and the narrator are not the same person. Now, to some of you, this is going to be surprising, but that's the way an author writes a story, is that he generally creates some kind of a narrator to tell you the story. Okay, now, sometimes authors create such good narrators that readers sometimes think that the narrator is really the author. This especially happened to Edgar Allan Poe, who created narrators who might have been drunks or druggies or whatever, and so the general public came to believe that Edgar Allan Poe was a drunk or a druggie, when in fact he was a very boring guy and lived a very boring life, but his narrators that he created made us think that his life was other than that. So if you've been, if you've been made to believe that Poe is the person that's talking to you in his stories, believe me, that's not the case. The narrator and the author are not the same thing. Okay, they are two very different things. So lodge that in your mind right away. Okay, again, for some of you that's a new idea, but that's okay. That's what we're here for, our new ideas. Okay, now what do narrators do? Well, they tell us the story. So why are we talking about them? Isn't that obvious? Well, yes and no. There are different types of narrators. Many times a narrator tells us the story from the third person. The narrator is not at all involved in the story, but it's as if the narrator is way out on the outside looking in, telling us what he's seeing. For instance, in Miss Brill, we had a third-person narrator. The narrator talks about a character by name, talks about he, she, it. The narrator does not talk about himself at all, but only talks about characters. Miss Brill would be an example of a story told by a third-person narrator. The Birthmark is also a story told by a third-person narrator. The narrator is viewing this whole story and tells us about Elmar, Georgiana, and Abinadab, okay? Which spelled backwards, by the way, is bad anima, and yet he maybe is the brightest one in the whole story. And you can debate that, but I think he is, because he's the one who has the insight into both Elmer and Georgiana right from the beginning. Okay, somebody made a point of saying he told Elmer not to mess with her, and Elmer didn't listen. We saw that. Anyway, so the third-person narrator is looking at a story completely from the outside and talks in terms of he, she, it, they. Okay? Besides a third-person narrator, we also have the general heading of a first-person narrator. There are a bunch of subtypes of first-person narrators, but a first-person narrator is somebody who is a character in the story, is personally involved in the story. We get some stories that come to us from the point of view of I. For instance, many of Edgar Allan Poe's stories came to us from the point of view of I. Okay? I am telling you the story. Again, that's not the author, that's a created narrator, and usually a character in the story. So we have the first-person narrator, but then a subtype of the first-person narrator is the omniscient first-person narrator. An omniscient first-person narrator will talk to us knowing everything. He is all-knowing. Omni means all, shio means knowledge. So the omniscient narrator is inside of basically everybody's head. He can tell us what everybody's thinking. He knows everything, especially the main character, who may or may not be the first-person narrator. Then we get a collective first-person narrator. Where did we see a collective first-person narrator? In A Rose for Emily. We saw a narrator who was looking at Emily from the point of view of the narrator was the collection of the townspeople, okay? The narrator was not really an active character in the story, but the narrator was the collection of the townspeople, okay? We get that kind of first-person narrator who tells us the story, seeing it there, being there, knowing what's going on, okay? Then we get a semi-omniscient narrator or partially omniscient narrator, a narrator who thinks they know everything that's going on but doesn't know quite everything, okay? So we also get, again, some stories that are told to us where the main character is the narrator. The narrator tells us the whole story from the point of view of I. So we have a third-person narrator who tells us the story from the point of view of he or she or it or they. The first-person narrator who tells us the story from the point of view of I or we, might be personally involved or not. Quick question for you. What motivated Elena Jorgensen to lure in our main character in one of the stories we'll read this week. Okay, have a good week.